dishonor to an individual who was not willing to undertake his duty in raising up seed to his brother there in ancient Israel in regards to the land and so on and so forth. And so that sort of does shed a little bit of light on what was going on in that story in the gospel as well. Now, when we consider this law, and what we have done as we have sought to examine the Old Testament law, we've wanted to ask the question, well, what kind of application can we make today? And I will have to confess that as I ponder this particular law, certainly on a general, only on a very general level, can we consider the duties of families. But again, even then, it was families within the ancient theocracy of Israel, specifically in regards to the continuation of the possession of the land. Certainly, it would be better for the people as a whole that you would not have the ability that unfortunately did take place later of people being able to start gathering land together and you end up with the very rich and the very poor and the very things that the law was intending to try to avoid ended up taking place. And so the prophets were often condemning Israel for falling into these things. That type of stuff did happen. But it's a very, very general thing because we simply don't have in the modern world anything that would be a direct corollary to the idea of the connectedness between the families and the land. Just in what we just read in Judges, for example. We saw it there. Remember, the woman asks for a blessing from her father, and she wants some springs. So she's given specific areas, specific plots that now become a part of that family. And the well-being of that family then becomes connected with their continuation and being able to continue to have that land. And so I guess in a general sense, what we could say is there was in the background a general equity, an idea of putting the good of the nation first. But in reality, as far as any formal application, the connection doesn't exist today because we simply don't have the same type of concept of land ownership and the connection of families to land that took place at this particular time. And you can certainly see how later on, when Israel really fell into a state of tremendous disrepair, that so many of the things that the law did provide to help people ceased to exist. And that is one of the reasons that there was so many dark times in Israel's history, was because they had forgotten his covenant. And God said from the beginning, as we'll see the next time, there are blessings and there are curses, and these are what some of the curses are going to be. And so here you have this rather odd to us, to our experience, law that was directly connected to the continuation of families in regards to the land. Now, how difficult is that? Well, it's not difficult. It certainly reminds us of the fact that we're dealing with an ancient context here. That would not have a whole lot of connection to where we are today. But what does that have to do with the next section, which is the really tough section? Well, I had made the mistake, and I'll read it here in a moment, but I had made the mistake of sometimes you can get used to reading through this section of Deuteronomy and sundry laws that in your own mind you start disconnecting the text when actually this only makes sense when you keep the text together. And that's where I had missed it until just recently and then sort of figured it out. Notice the next section beginning in verse 11. If two men, a man and his countryman, are struggling together, and the wife of one comes near to deliver her husband from the hand of the one who is striking him, and puts out her hand and seizes his genitals, then you shall cut off her hand. You shall not show pity. Well, you say, you could have skipped that one. No, because I have seen it used on the internet. I have seen it appear in articles concerning the barbarism of the Old Testament, so on and so forth. And certainly, if you isolate it, it's really difficult to even begin to understand what's behind all of this. But it's when you don't isolate it that it actually ends up making some kind of sense. Because once you see it as the negative or the reverse of what we just saw in regards to raising up seed, then it starts to make sense as to what's going on here. Because specifically, if in the preceding section there is a moral obligation to raise up seed to maintain the connection to the land, then what makes this woman's actions specifically evil, and that obviously if this happened even once, it would be remembered down through the history of the people of Israel. You'll notice there's no recording of it ever happening, at least not to my knowledge. But if it happened even once, then anyone who would get that idea would probably think twice before engaging in that activity again. And what makes it so bad is that it is connected to what we saw in the previous section, and it involves, obviously, then the ending of that relationship, really creating a situation artificially, just like what happened in the preceding section, where you can no longer have the raising up of seed and the continuing connection to the land. And so it is a prohibition because of the fact that it would result in the very same disruption that led to the shaming of the man, the removing of the sandal, the spitting in his face. He is not raising up seed. Now here is a woman in this situation doing something that could result in not being able to raise up seed for that man as well. And so it makes sense when the two are put together. If the two were not put together, if you didn't have the preceding section, I don't know how I would be able to make any sense out of it. But since the two of them are together, then both of them, it would seem to me, are directly related to the maintenance of the families and their possession of the land in the nation of Israel. Obviously, when this is raised on the internet, on Facebook, I have to remember that one, hadn't heard that one before, but or wherever else it might be, it will normally be isolated. Now, I would hope that most Christians, when faced with the text of Scripture, the very first thing you do is to read the context. Read the whole paragraph before and the whole paragraph following, just simply to have some kind of idea that if there is a context at all. But my concern is if people don't understand how the land was passed down, they might not see what the connection between these two sections really is.